Hello everybody, welcome back to Forza Horizon 4 with the latest mad Koenigsegg Jesko. It's a bit insane, actually. 1300 horsepower, it's right up there in crazy power figures. But of course, we've done sports car showdowns, we've done super sedan showdowns. Now it's time for the big guns. The most advanced, the most tech-savvy, the most powerful cars in the world. The HYPERCAR showdown. And there's a lot. We have the old school cars like the Mosler MT900S. We have the oddballs like the Ariel Atom and the Radical RXC, not necessarily hypercars, but the top end of the ultimate track toy spectrum. So I want to see how they would fare. We even do have an actual track car, the Vulcan AMR Pro, just for a little bit of variety's sake. And of course, the Holy Trinity, the P1, the 918, and the Ferrari. So, with all of these hypercars in Forza, let's see how the Jesko fares. And we start out in a traditional hot lap. 6 laps, fastest one will be the best. Pretty straightforward, we've done it a billion times. This one, though, I decided to go for a different track. You see, when I did the super sedans, I had the more straight-line speed-oriented half-oval track. This one, though, this one is all technical stuff. There is still a fair bit of acceleration, certainly on the main straightaway. You can get up to some 160, 170 miles an hour. But it is more technical, it's more focused on the handling, while still having some acceleration zones, for sure. And the Jesko, I was expecting a little better, to be honest. It's certainly better than its contemporaries from Koenigsegg, but it's not the best. It can be quite tricky to drive, because it doesn't have the absolute best turn-in. And then, once you do get on the power, you have to be very careful at going through the gears so that you don't spin the wheels up and cause chaos. It's very tricky to drive in that respect. But all in all, it's certainly no bad, and, well, when in doubt, you have 1300 horsepower under your right foot to kick you out of any corner that you might be slow on, so no real problems there. It's not quite the most powerful, but it's up there. It's certainly up there. The same cannot be said for the slowest car of the day, the Lycan Hypersport. This was always a bit of an iffy one. It is relatively low down S2 class, it's quite heavy, and it only has a measly 700 odd horsepower. It's quite frankly pathetic. It just wasn't fast, it didn't have any grip, it didn't have any front end grip, on understeer, and when you're going around a corner and trying to get on the throttle, it can have a little bit of oversteer here and there, although it's nowhere near as bad as, say, the Jesko or the Regera. That being said, it's still not great in the oversteer department, and unlike the Jesko, where if you had problems you would just floor it and it would go out of any corner at 200 miles an hour, this one doesn't have that. It doesn't have the simple power-to-weight ratio as other vehicles in this challenge do. So it struggled quite a bit. We're glad it showed up, but it did struggle a lot. I'm gonna be honest, I thought the Senna would have this in the bag, because when I drove it, it was by far the best handling car here. Except for maybe the Motor, that was pretty close second, but all in all, the Senna from McLaren was fantastic to drive. It just turned in on a dime. It wasn't quite flat out on one of the corners, one of the high-speed corners, but it was pretty damn close. And it had 790 horsepower to accelerate out, and it didn't weigh very much, and it had a massive amount of aero and grip. It was incredible. It was so good through these corners. You could brake so late, you could accelerate hard and not worry about traction loss. It was a damn good car. I thought that it would be the winner here. And it wasn't, because the Senna, in a rather big upset, to be honest, for me, came second place to the Ultima GTR. The Ultima is barely a hypercar in the traditional sense because, well, you build it yourself. It's a kit car, so in many ways, it's incredibly cheap, only around 120 grand to buy, as opposed to many millions. But once you finish building it, it's a goddamn rocket ship. As the name suggests, 1,020 horsepower, weighs less than 2,500 pounds, and I thought it would be too uncontrollable to set a lap time faster than the Senna, but as you can see, it was not just slightly faster, it was half a second faster. And I had a pretty good lap with the Senna. And it demolished the Senna by miles. Half a second a lap faster. In car time, that is a year. I knew the Ultima was fast. I knew that from Horizon 3, I knew that from Forza 7, I knew that from any game that the Ultima has been in. But with the Senna being introduced to Horizon 4, I thought it might actually have a rival in the lap time testing, and not really. Not really at all. It's sort of insane. Yeah, the Senna was good. The Ultima, though, was 1,200... The Ultima with 1,000 horsepower, though, that will vaporize all comers. One thing that did impress me, the Apollo IE and the Moz are very good. 44.3 and 44.6. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. The only thing it beat was the Radical, the RXC. That was the fastest of the track toys. 44.444. In 5th place, getting 55 points. Nice symmetrical numbers there. You can see the Jesko, the highest place, Koenigsegg, 8th place, beating out the Agera RS in 16th place, then the Regera in 20th. Koenigsegg's weren't great. They were beaten by a Veneno, which is a great handling car that has literally no power. Yeah, no. I mean, it got beaten by the Zenvo, which surprisingly didn't catch on fire. I'm still blown away by the Ultima, because good god, that was a hell of a car in that lap time testing. When it comes to these hypercars, the biggest thing by far is the top speed. That's what everybody always asks, right? How fast is the car? Well, I didn't want to do a traditional speed run on the freeway, that would be a bit too easy. So I went with the oval track. There's a speed zone. So while technically it's not absolute top speed, it is pretty damn close, and it still gives us pretty good judgment on how fast they would go over a distance, because it is still flat out for all of these vehicles. And we started out with this 918. It's often regarded as the slowest of the Holy Trinity in a straight line, and it is, having the least power than the Ferrari or the P1, and it wasn't bad per se. 200 miles an hour, almost on the dot, is still quite impressive, but I was honestly expecting a little bit more for, 900 horsepower all-wheel drive. The Devo, though, the Devo was interesting. You see, the Devo is the more handling-focused version of the Chiron. It still has 1,500 horsepower, but it's a handling focus, so it has a lower top speed. And yet, because it handled better on the oval track, it was faster than the Chiron. Not by much, by about 4 miles an hour, but it was still faster. And, 1,500 horsepower, no matter how much aero you have, will still go quite quickly. Quite quickly, in fact. Of course, if you want to talk about horsepower, literally nothing will stop the sheer speed and 1,900 horsepower of the Rimac. Good god, the Rimac is insane. Of course, the Rimac is the only car that actually wasn't able to go flat out, because it's so heavy and it has no grip at all. So you really are quite scared as you go around the oval. So I did have to have a little bit of a lift, but 1,900 horsepower at the end of the day, all electric, will get it done. And pretty sharpish, as you can see. Which brings us to the Ultima. The Ultima. Compared to the 1,900 horsepower Rimac, you thought it would be not quite as fast. However, you forget about the sheer ferocity of the acceleration of this thing. Yes, it has, though not quite the most horsepower, not quite the least horsepower, slotted in the middle, but it has the best power-to-weight ratio at exactly 2 pounds per horsepower near enough. That's better than the Jesko, that's better than the Agera. It's a monster, in fact. And as a result, it accelerates like hell all the way around the banking up to 225 miles an hour. But that was not the winner, no, no, no. The Ultima, as impressive as it was beaten by something, the Koenigsegg Jesko at 230 miles an hour. This is where we expected it to shine. Honestly, I expected it to be slower than its rival, the Agera RS, because the Agera was specifically designed for speedrunning, and the Jesko was not, in this form, specifically designed. But 230 miles an hour is 10 miles an hour faster than the Agera. It's insane. Quite insane. I love it. We finally found something the Koenigsegg's are good at, considering all of them scored in the top 5. The Jesko losing out to the Venom, the Agera losing out to the Venom by just 1/10 of a mile an hour. Yeah. That's very, very close indeed. One vehicle I expected to do a little bit better was the Speedtail. The Speedtail was famed for being the fastest McLaren ever, but it got beaten by the P1. It was 2 miles an hour slower than the P1. I don't understand that. That was a surprise to me, because the Speedtail was a bit of a letdown around the track, and on the oval, top speed, it wasn't that much better. The Radical and the Atom did struggle. In fact, the Atom got last, because, well, let's be honest, it's the least powerful car here, less than 500 horsepower, and it isn't exactly aerodynamic. It almost beat the Radical. Almost. Yeah, those cars, we expected them to struggle. They're not very powerful, and they're very aerodynamic heavy. So while they're great on a track, they're not great here. One that surprised me, though, honestly surprised me, was the Ferrari. The Ferrari. 212, it's by far one of the best for its class. I didn't expect it. It's very old. It's, God, 5-6 years old now. And it's still doing 212. It's better than the Devo. It's better than the AMR Pro. It's better than the Apollo, even. Which shares similarities in its construction. It's quite impressive, actually. I was very impressed by that car. I'm going to be honest, this next challenge is not for the nauseous in our audience, and I do apologize in advance, but I wanted to test out the pure handling. Just grip. No major focus on acceleration, no focus on top speed or high-speed stability, no. Just mechanical, raw grip. By seeing how fast they could go around a roundabout. Now, if you want to skip ahead, you can. I'm not going to hold it against you. You can get quite dizzy looking at this. Lord knows I was very dizzy, doing all these 23 tests in a loop over and over again. It was not fun, but it was very interesting, actually. It was actually a very interesting test for me personally to find out, because it was strange. Some cars that I thought would do good did terrible. Some cars that I thought would do terrible did quite good. So things like the Atom, which I thought would finally be able to redeem itself, considering its, raw grip, had no traction at all, just spun its wheels around the entire thing. It was a bit of a mess. Then we have cars like the P1, which I thought would spin their wheels all the way around the course, and it actually didn't do too bad, relative speaking to the rest of the field. Not top 10 worthy, but not bad. One car that surprised me a lot was the Apollo, though. That thing was a lot faster than I expected. It wasn't anything crazy on the lap time track, but it did really good here. And there were a lot of vehicles that I thought would do better that didn't. The Koenigsegg's, being their usual oversteering mayhem selves, really struggled. They did not like this at all. In fact, most of the ultra-high-powered vehicles, with the exception of the Devo, like the all-wheel drive cars, really struggled. The Rimac spun its wheels up, the McLarens spun their wheels up. Everything was just a big slidey mess. Except for one car, the winner, the Porsche 918. I didn't expect the 918 to win this because it didn't really distinguish itself as exceptional in the lap time department, but all-wheel drive and pretty good all-wheel drive systems, so allowing you to evenly split that torque and power across each wheel, really helped that 918 carry an immense amount of speed around the corners. And yeah, it won by a considerable margin, exactly 1/10 of a second over the Veneno. The Veneno finally redeemed itself for being mediocre and then even more mediocre, and it did quite well. I was very impressed by it. I know it's all-wheel drive and very handling focused, but I didn't expect it to get a podium spot, much less second place. I mean, I thought that would go to the Senna, and the Senna did good, 5th place, but yeah, the Veneno beat the Senna. Damn. That was very impressive. I mean, the Ultima, which was the fastest, half a second faster than the Senna around a lap time, was 9th. It was barely in the top 10 and only beat the Rimac by less than 1/10 of a second. The Rimac was slightly terrifying. And the Koenigseggs, let's not even start on them. The Regera scored stone dead last, being slower than even the Lykan Hypersport, which is very happy to finally not be last in a handling circuit. Yeah, this was a bit more skewed towards the low-power vehicle, so the Radical, once again, getting his time to shine, having no power, but still being able to do 7th place was pretty good. Yeah, I love this test, because it was just so different than anything else I've done before. It really tested the mechanical grip and the traction around a corner, rather than off the line or top speed or anything like that. It was very good. And the final test is going to be a bit of a cliche. 0 to 150, and back to 0, because 0 to 100 would take about 8 seconds. Less sense in some cases. We'll get to that one in a bit. I do want to make a quick clarification. The reason why the Jesko looks different than everything else is because I forgot where I filmed the others. So when the Jesko came out, I didn't remember, so I just did the airfield. Anyway, it sort of struggled. It's rear-wheel drive, a whole lot of horsepower, and that's what we saw were most of these vehicles, especially the Regera. Regera, despite having one gear and being, I think, the current record holder for 0 to 300 kph and then back to 0, struggled a lot. Yeah, rear-wheel drive in general just did not do very well. The Speedtail struggled, the Lykan, well, we already seen that one. The P1 was a little bit better than expected, but still not great. Really, there weren't that many standouts from the rear-wheel drive category. All-wheel drive was the way to go, and if you were going to go to all-wheel drive, well, literally your only option was the Rimac. It's all-electric, check. It's all-wheel drive, check. It's 1900 horsepower, a check. It was slightly terrifying, the Rimac. I would imagine after the second acceleration launch, you would break your spine. Because it just launches like a nuclear missile. In fact, it did 0 to 150 miles an hour, and then back to 0 in just over 8 seconds. 8 seconds from 0 to 150 to 0. It did 0 to 150. It did that test faster than a Ford Fiesta to 0 to 60. Jesus Christ. It's stupid. That, of course, being said, and all that stuff I mentioned about all-wheel drive being superior, there were a few exceptions, mainly the Ultima GTR and the Koenigsegg Agera RS. Yes, the Jesko was actually slower than the Agera RS by 0.03 of a second, but it was still slower. So, it's not impossible for all-wheel drive to be unstoppable. They can be beaten. It's very difficult, not a lot of vehicles could do it. It really revolved around having just sheer horsepower once you got off the line, with the exception of the Ultima, which is pretty much a jack of all trades, apparently. However, nothing could touch the Rimac. Nothing could touch that goddamn Rimac. It was stupid. Of course, interestingly, the vehicle I think deserves the most respect, and probably the most underdog of the underdogs, was the Huayra. The Huayra scored 5th. I don't think of the Huayra very much. It's a great looking car, it's a great sounding car, and the handles great because of the weird flappy arrow bits. But it wasn't exactly noteworthy in this challenge so far, but a top 5 is very, very impressive. I mean, it beat the Devo, not by much, by 200ths of a second, but it still beat the Devo. Yeah, it was quite good. Also, the Porsche, amusingly, despite having all-wheel drive, was slower than the rear-wheel drive McLaren and Ferrari. That doesn't make any sense, but there you go. But don't worry, because even with the impressive horsepower and traction that the Devo and the McLaren have, they're still 3 seconds slower than that goddamn Rimac. 3 seconds slower. I'm done. Cars cannot progress any further than what that stupid Rimac has done for acceleration testing. Which brings me on to the final standings, and no surprises here. The Ultimate GTR is the winner, as you all predicted. 255 points using the V8 Supercar scoring system. Having 3 out of 4 podiums is not a bad thing. Second place, a long way down, talking 211 points, is the Jesko, doing quite well. It won the speed zone and sort of was mediocre everywhere else, but it was the best Koenigsegg by miles, beating out the Agera in 6th place and the poor Rigera in 20th. Third place, though, would be interesting. The Rimac Concept 2. Not very fun to drive at all, but god is it fast. The all-wheel drive electric power is simply absurd, and it really is scary how fast that vehicle is, if not slightly uncontrollable. The Speedtail was, not very good. In fact, it was the worst out of all of the McLarens, despite being the newest. The Senna, very impressive, scoring 5th place, helped out with that fantastic lap, and the surprisingly good ring around the roundabout. It did quite good for being a rear-wheel drive track car, certainly the fastest of the track cars, considering the Atom is in 22nd place and the Radical is in 16th place, which, to be honest, is not bad for the Radical. It beats the Mosler, it beats the Speedtail, it beats the Regera. That's no small feat for that. The Wibbly Wobbly Wing Zenvo thing, that I didn't really mention too much because it was sort of mid-range everywhere, continues to be exceptionally average at 8th place overall, 172 points, not too bad. Yeah, the best of the Holy Trinity, though, would be the Porsche. 9th place, 168 points, beating out the McLaren in 14th, and the Ferrari in 13th. The Ferrari just... It was very consistent. I'll give it credit where it's due. Very consistent. Scored 11th place, 10th place, 11th place, and 11th place. So yeah, the Ultima, no small surprise. It isn't really a hypercar, though, to be honest, because you do have to build it in your shed. And it is more of a kit car that just so happens to have 1,000 horsepower carbon fiber construction and can lay waste to literally everything on Earth around a track. But, if we're talking purely hypercar sense, the Jesko is the ultimate hypercar by miles. It's incredibly fast and top speed. It is a bit scary to drive, but it is fun to drive once you do tame it, once you start to understand it, to see as a better terminology. And it is very fast accelerating, almost being within a few seconds of the electric cars. And the Rimac does do a good job of illustrating where electric cars have come, because we started out with just a Roadster. Remember, back in 2006, all we had was some mediocre Lotus with some fancy AA batteries. And the Rimac shows that with all-wheel drive and a stupid amount of power, you can put to shame a lot of the well-established hypercar and supercar manufacturers. It was really quite good. In fact, the surprising thing for me was that the Rimac scored solid mid-pack everywhere, if not at the front. Because I expected it to be awful around the lap, and it was. It was not fun to drive, but it was fast. It was faster than the GTA Spanum. It was faster than the Regera, than the Agera. It was almost as fast as a Ferrari LaFerrari. And it's electric. And it's meant for drag racing. And it was able to put up a fight against these traditional supercars and hypercars. I mean, it put up more of a fight than the actual track toys did, with the exception of the Senna. So, well played there, well played there. But if you do want a proper hypercar, go buy a Shed and an Ultima and you'll demolish everyone for 1/10 of the price.